Welcome back, fellow returners, to Games That Could Have Been, the show where we highlight things that were cut from the final copies of Final Fantasy games. This week's matter of business is a tactical RPG that was heavily inspired by games like Ogre Battle, which, funnily enough, Yasumi Matsuno, who worked on the Ogre Battle series, actually joined Square and helped Hironobu Sakaguchi, the father of the Final Fantasy series, make the game into what we know and love today. In fact, multiple other staff members were veterans of the Ogre Battle series, including artist Hiroshi Minagawa and Akihiko Yoshida, and composers Hitoshi Sakimoto and Masaharu Iwata. The game was actually conceptualized way back in 1993, a full 4 years before it was finally released, as Sakaguchi was a massive fan of the tactical RPG genre. To kick off this unused content, we're going to start with looking at several unused areas that were cut in some form or fashion out of the final game. I'm going to kind of rapid fire these, so let's get started. The first map is a series of small hospital rooms. Interestingly, they're set up to not need the rotating camera movement seen in some cutscenes in the final game, making scripting events seemingly easier. They're spaced out just far enough apart that the camera won't see the other rooms on the map at all, which I think is just smart. This map, known as Wargilis Trade City, was completely cut from the game, but it looks like it might have been used for a cutscene possibly. A port town, complete with a pier and shipping crates all throughout. The next few maps are all connected to each other and involve the gate at Lasalia. Small note here, these maps, when placed into the game via hacking, turn out to be the glitchiest of all of them. And if viewing any of them from another angle, some parts of the maps completely disappear, or are displayed incorrectly, leading us to believe that they were intended only for cutscenes where the camera doesn't move at all. The last one in this group of maps, known in the game's data as Main Street of Lasalia, seems to be the most complete of any of them. However, when the camera rotates around, the houses disappear entirely, pointing to, again, the probability that these were only intended to be background settings for story points that never made it to the final game. There are many unused battle commands and abilities, but we're mainly going to focus on some really interesting ones, including the ability known as Phantom. The end-game description of this command states, Hell Magician Job Command. Makes illusional monsters to control the world. As there is no Hell Magician class in the entire game, this command and description goes completely unseen. Supplemental abilities exist in the game that can help aid the player in traversing certain landscapes or increase his attributes, but there are a few that were not finished, including Reflect, which would give the player a magic bouncing reflect status, kind of similar to wall rings in Final Fantasy VI, but this one was never finished as it actually has no effect at all and does nothing. Non-charge automatically resets the player's CT or charge time to 0, meaning there is no time needed to charge attacks. This is probably meant to just be a debug tool for the programmers, but it remains a huge favorite of GameShark users and hackers to use during playthroughs. Silent Walk renders the player able to walk around without being seen or heard, which would be fantastic to use in certain battles. But just like Reflect, it's completely unfinished and does nothing when placed in the game. The next two are enemy-only abilities, although one of them, which has no name, doesn't work at all. However, the Move Underwater ability does have a name, and it is used by primarily the Squid Demon type, allowing for movement in water. So technically it is used, it's just never seen. There are several unused tracks, but the word unused here is slightly misleading. I'll explain what I mean when we get there. For now, though, the first track we'll listen to a snippet of is entitled Mr. Bear Goes to the Ball, which is just fantastic. And it references a fictional Mr. Bear, although it has no bearing on how it's going to be used in the game. You see what they did there? Anyway, have a listen. The next song is the one that I talked about earlier. So parts of the song are used in various battles and cutscenes, but it was actually composed as one cohesive track called apoplexy, which means in its basic sense, aside from the medical connotations involving stroke and hemorrhaging, something similar to the speechlessness that results of extreme anger, or alternatively incapacity or unconsciousness. I'm gonna let this one go for a bit to highlight the usage of its various parts in different ways throughout the game. The next few are very short, so I'll play them in their entirety as they're just short little fanfares that were going to be played at various story points or events like leveling up or learning a new ability. Side note, some of these little fanfares don't sound like they would fit anywhere, but I'm going to showcase them anyway because I absolutely love finding unused stuff in these games. There are tons of little character odysseys, like Olan being a completely playable character at one point in the game, instead of simply being used for story points exclusively, hinting towards more plans for him than what ended up in the final version. But there's a job that's never used or seen or even implemented in the game that's tied to one character specifically, and that's the elegant flyer job used by Tita. According to the cutting room floor, Tita is technically present in a single battle at the very end of Chapter 1, but she's dead and cannot be revived by any means. She does not have a unique menu sprite. Instead, her menu sprite is a character who isn't anywhere else in the final game. There's only one piece of concept art I could find for the elegant flyer job, seen here, and it's rumored that the job was cut so early in development that Yasumi Matsuno completely forgot the original purpose of having the job. Now, of course, there are several unused treasure chests and Zodiac scenes that I'll leave a link for in the description if you want to take the time to go rummaging through their website. But these are just some of the entries that I found most interesting. What did you think of some of the songs cut from the final game? Do you think they fit anywhere? Also, what did you think of some of the maps not used in the final game? And lastly, this is episode 2 in a series of videos covering unused content from Final Fantasy games, so if you don't watch this video covering Final Fantasy IV's cut content, you're not going to learn about an airship command used in battle that was cut from the final version.